Is capitalism dead? Is it going to be replaced by a new form of digital tokenization that will really change the way you look at everything in economics? Well, let's take a look at this and how it will affect your life on this episode of The Steve Beeman Show. Welcome back. It's good to talk with you again. I want to make right at the outset a comment that I changed my shirt. I did a podcast that had a purple collar, and someone kindly commented about it. So I've worn a little more bland a shirt today. But this is an important topic we're going to be talking about because really it's one that I've been preaching about for 15 years. But now for the first time, we're actually seeing it come to life. And that is the transition from old world capitalism, or what I've called industrial capitalism, into a new tokenized capitalism that is genuinely what Adam Smith would have referred to as utopia in the free market. This is not communism per se, even though it does represent community ownership of things. We'll talk about that a little later. But what this represents is a completely new form of democratized ownership of everything: hard assets, business assets, intellectual property. We are now entering an era where the tokenized world can run all of this, and it is changing the very nature of economics in the world. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see this come out. And as part of my 10-10-10 economy that I've preached about so much, this is part of what's going to replace it for the 70% who don't participate in the primary economy. I mean, let's be honest. We've seen, especially in the last month that the U.S. tariffs hitting, we've seen how people are running away from traditional economics. They're buying gold, crypto, whatever they can to hedge themselves against the really malaise that could come about in the traditional economies as a result of these trade wars. Well, it really isn't the trade wars that are highlighting it. It's all of it. It's the deficits we see and the debts that we see piled onto these economies. My last podcast looked at the Federal Reserve, and I gave it some exculpatory points from the fact that it doesn't print the money willingly. It does it in response to government continually asking it to buy more and more debt. Well, we have this really significant problem, especially in the U.S., of debt, $36 trillion of it, $9 trillion of it owned by foreign countries, which is real debt. Well, what do we do about it? What are the solutions? We've talked about that in general, but here's the reality. I sit here today, I don't think we have the political will to fix it. I don't think we have the kind of, you can love Trump and say he's the disruptor in chief. I don't think they're going to be able to cut these deficits back. I think the structure of government itself is the impediment. I think the Congress and the Senate, when they get to this thing, they're not going to cut spending at all. And so what do you have? You have continued deficits in the foreseeable future forever. You have debts growing so that the children of this nation, those in their teens and 20s and into their 30s, are going to be suffering through inflation because the only way out of that debt is to print money. Well, I think there's something else happening here, and it's the cross current of the digital capitalism of the future, what I've called the decentralized capitalism. And I want to talk about that with you today. What it basically represents is when I started speaking about this 15 years ago, and I talked about the post-capitalistic era, I talked in general about an advanced barter system. And what I was seeing then is the idea of peer-to-peer networking, peer-to-peer business, so that instead of having middlemen like a bank to go through on a credit card, you go right to the vendor with a card that just transfers your money to them with no friction. That's what I think we're headed toward. However, in the last 5 years, with the explosion in AI and the real explosion of the use of the blockchain, I think we're getting to the point where I can say confidently, within the next 5 to 10 years, the idea of the decentralized capitalism of the tokenized world is going to come to life. It's going to happen. So I'm going to talk about it today so that you begin to understand how this will affect your life. This isn't science fiction. It's not Buck Rogers in the next century. This is happening now. So let's take a look at what the decentralized capitalism looks like and what it's based upon. And it's really three key things that are important to understand. What's called a DAO, then the idea of tokenized economies and how that works, and then protocols. Because it's those three things working together that make it possible to run this whole idea of decentralized finance or decentralized capitalism. So what's a DAO? Let's take a look at that for a minute. I was first exposed to this several years ago, and I thought the idea was pretty cool. In traditional law, in common law, we have business set up as an independent entity. It's a corporation, or we've had in recent years the limited liability corporation, or it's a general partnership. There are governance vehicles placed on top of business operations that we do so that we know how the business operates. Let's use the corporation because it's the most well-known example. A corporation has shareholders at the core, and those are the people for whom that corporation is built to serve. It's their financial interest that the corporation was established to provide for. Well, the shareholders can't in aggregate manage the business. There may be too many of them. In a traditional public company in the US, there are way too many shareholders to have them, guide the company. So what do? They hire a board of directors. The board of directors then is given the mandate by the shareholders to go out and build an executive team to run the business. That's typically thought of as the president, the vice president, the secretary, and the treasurer, or their appointees in those areas. It's a pretty clean operational structure. It's worked for a long, long time. We've been using corporations in this structure for hundreds of years. And in the industrial capitalism of the past, it worked pretty well. However, you and I both know that there are times that that board of directors or that executive team can become corrupted. You have blatant examples of this. Enron, back in the early 2000s, where the board and the executive team defrauded people blatantly by overstating asset values and doing trading within the organization that they weren't allowed to do. I mean, we've had the Ponzi schemes that have come out. So there's an awful lot of stuff within the world of corporate America that has failed, not because the structure was wrong. No, not at all. It's because people run those structures. People are fallible. People are sometimes weak. People are sometimes greedy and selfish, and all of the other things that make us so human create within that structure of the corporation serious problems. Well, the DAO is what I believe will be the future of corporate structures. What a DAO represents, and it stands for Distributed Autonomous Organization, DAO. What it does is it creates an enterprise, or a community, I think is a better word, of people with a shared interest, and then governs an interest or an enterprise using that group of people. They cut out the middlemen. I think a somewhat example of this is Uber, where they don't really have a senior manager. They don't have a management hierarchy so much. It's a group of programmers who set up programs to run how the drivers work and operate. The programs manage the operation, not people. And the DAO is set up so that computers run it and agreements, smart contracts run it, not people. It eliminates the emotion of people. It eliminates the personal agendas of people. It creates an organization that serves only the interest of those people who own membership in that DAO. Now, I think the way this is going to happen is the DAO will be utilizing a tokenized economy rather than a fiat currency economy. And the way that works is a token. I'm not talking about Bitcoin on this. I'm talking about a holistic transformation of the way things are done. A tokenized economy allows you and me to do business back and forth without any interference from anybody. No bank, no government. It's a frequent flyer mile that I'm trading with you for your service, or you're trading with me for mine. It's the gift points that we get from places. It's all of those things can be seen as part of a tokenized economy. It's totally off the ledger. It's done up in the blockchain and it's done in the cloud. Using blockchain, it's fully distributed, so nobody can steal these tokens that we have. They're distributed around, and it's only with your key you can get at them. But the idea is here that we're linking the DAO together with smart contracts and tokens all through the protocol set up by the DAO to manage the operation of the organization or the community as it sees fit. A good example of this, and it's hard to put live examples on it because this is new. This is the revolutionary stuff, by the way, that is the next level of evolution in economics. But it's not known, and it's hard to give you good examples because it's not done today. But I read recently, it was 2013 or 14 or so, about a group of people in India. They were farmers. And I forget the number, but let's say there were 10 of them. They together or individually could not afford a combine. They're very expensive pieces of equipment used to harvest the crops. These 10 got together and created a DAO. They created a community an autonomous organization that was their governance. They put in the governance of the DAO, but the DAO then went out and purchased a combine and fractionally operated it between these 10. They'd set up the rules of the DAO ahead of time. They'd set up the operations of the DAO ahead of time. And the DAO was able to maximize the use of that combine amongst these 10 different farmers. Now, you can look at that and say that's community ownership of property. Oh my gosh, it's communism. No, it's perfect democratization. This is exciting stuff. This is Adam Smith's dream. Communism requires coercion because you expect the state to top down tell you what you're to do. What this does is give complete control to the individuals on a voluntary basis. It's perfect freedom, perfect capitalism. It's the free market on steroids. So what you're going to see happening is the creation of these DAOs by individuals in a community that they voluntarily join. And in those communities, that DAO will manage a business, an idea, a bank account. I think it could go to the point where that's how you own real estate. I could see a world in which the entirety of this idea of individual ownership of things goes away. That everything, including your ideas, the Steve Beeman Show, is owned by a DAO with all of the stakeholders participating in the management and operations of it. On this podcast, I don't want to always come up with the ideas of what to talk about. I want the community to guide that. I want to be looking at things that are of interest to you, not just to me. Now, I have opinions on all this stuff, and I'll embed that because it's my show. But the ideas behind the shows, if you have questions about, again, just common stuff, the Fed or how a corporation works, or you're talking about how to raise money for your business, or things I've done in my life, I'll share that experience. But as we go through the development of this show, more and more, I look to you as the members of the community guiding me and these producers on where we go. That's a DAO in its purest form. Now, I think when you link the DAO to this tokenized economy, I don't think government can keep up with this. I think we're going to have a vehicle through which we can reward each other with the use of tokens. Now, again, Bitcoin is a currency, and the crypto that you see is competitive with the fiat currencies. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about tokens that the DAO agrees between us are usable within us. Is it currency-like? No, kind of. It's just a trading vehicle to make facilitation of trading ideas and control of ideas easier. But then in these smart contracts, what we have is the ability to eliminate fraud. Because in this tokenized economy, run off the DAO, it's only available through smart contracts which control the release of the tokens. So in other words, if you and I agree that we're going to do something for a token type compensation, the smart contracts control the release of the tokens. So I can only get the tokens if I perform the task the smart contract asks for. It's a perfect control mechanisms, and it's all done by digital. It's not done by humans, so there's no incentive to screw people. That's what's been going on. The reason the Fed doesn't work, and I talked a little bit about, not a lot, talked a lot about the Fed in that last thing, but the reason it doesn't work is there are people running it. People are fallible. If you had the Federal Reserve of the United States operating in this kind of environment where it is kind of a DAO now because it's owned by the member banks. The problem is because it's not digital, it has all of the what I'll call the corruption of a human organization. The DAOs, together with tokenization, blockchain control, and the smart contracts, eliminate corruption. I think it's not just a future that's going to be, I think it is. And I think you're going to see more of this play out in the virtualness of all of the transactions we do. I've written some articles about it. Those will be put up on Substack. So I just want you to start wrapping your brain around the possibility that the economy of tomorrow looks nothing like the economy of yesterday. Not in the least. And it's because of the intersection, again, of this DAO with tokenization, smart contracts, the blockchain, and the appropriate protocols put on the DAO. Now, as I said, some are going to argue that this sounds a lot like communism. But the difference is this. When Marx envisioned his communistic world, he envisioned a world where people were told kind of what to do in the interest of the community itself. Well, that's not what this does at all. This gives perfect freedom. This allows people to guide their own lives, their own asset values, their own intellectual property value. This, again, going back to the 10-10-10 economy, where I talk about in that 10%, extreme freedom is needed. Well, this is extreme freedom, and it's made possible through the integration of, again, a DAO, a tokenized economy, the blockchain, and the smart contracts. So we're entering a time in which economic freedom is the natural way of things. I think it's here, and I think it's real. Will it be disruptive moving to it? Absolutely. I'm looking at the markets like you do, and I'm looking at both the U.S. and the global markets. And in this post-tariff model, my concern in the U.S. is that we're heading toward kind of a malaise in the market like the 70s. I could easily see a period where the U.S. market doesn't move for the next 10 years. First of all, its valuations are high. Its price earnings ratio, if you look at like a Shiller index, which is adjusted PE, it's at like 26 or 27. Historically, that's about 18. Well, that's a 30% drop in prices just to bring the index valuation down. I think you could see a real reset of the value of the markets. And that's why people are flocking to gold. I mean, they're seeing it too. In terms of the bond market, which is the granddaddy of them, bond market's much bigger than the equity markets, you could see a reset of that because interest rates have been artificially low for a decade. You could see a complete resetting of bond values and stock values. I think it's completely possible. And I think as we move more and more into this digital future, this will be more and more of an impact. Elon Musk recently, again, love him or hate him, I think he's a really smart guy. He was talking about how in the future of Tesla, instead of selling cars, they're going to sell membership in a car. So each car is its own DAO, if you will. And when you need it, you call up, the car comes to you to take you where you want to go. But the thought is that we're underutilizing cars because most people don't drive their car 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They drive it an hour a day or 2 hours a day, and it sits in their garage the rest of the time. So his thought is you create a DAO around the car, and it allocates it among a community of people who need transportation. And therefore, the car is more efficiently used, the people are more efficiently served for less money, and everybody wins. That's his mindset. So I don't think I'm crazy here. I think you're going to begin seeing more and more of how things that you want to do and things that you want to own are owned in a DAO and using smart contracts and crypto. not crypto, I'll throw that up, forgive me, tokens. The difference being a token is a private transaction tool where crypto is a public thing, again, competitive with a currency. These tokens I'm talking about are just private transaction vehicles between two people. Now, are they convertible into fiat currency? Probably at some point. Do they have to be? Not if there are enough people in the community, because you just trade it amongst each other. I think we're headed there. I think we're already there. So this idea that the DAO becomes developed, and then if you look at it again vis-a-vis collectivism, it is collective ownership of things, but it's done on such a voluntary basis that it flies in the face of what Karl Marx thought. This is the opposite of Marxian communism. It's very much the natural end to Adam Smith capitalism. I mean, it's free markets perfectly. So there are quite a few things that this, affects in the real world. Again, you're looking at fractional ownership of real estate, fractional ownership of cars. It's the US stock market gives fractional ownership of companies. But as we've discussed, it's imperfect ownership. Those shareholders, the stakeholders, right? They hire a board which is fallible because it's people. They hire management which is fallible because it's people. And we know how often those become commingled and problematic, or a big shareholder gets too much say in it. Well, the DAO allows for all of you to own assets with a computer doing the management of it. Now, the challenge, of course, is to write the smart contracts in the way that it's adequately controlled and the protocols and governance on that DAO. But that can be done, again, using a computer's rational assistance. Your best friend will be AI. And it will be done like these large language models do now, in a communicative sort of way where you say to your smart contract person, I need a contract between me and this other DAO, and I need this DAO to execute these objectives. So the digital communication will be there, the digital controls will be there, and you'll have a DAO that is independent of human frailty and human corruption. I like that. I think that's pretty cool. In fact, true story, when I met the marketing people at Deny Media, I was down doing a press tour in the East Coast. And so I was going to all these press sites, and I was talking to interview. And I was talking about the potentiality of global government. And I got there because I've looked at human nature and human condition. And we started out as a family unit, right? And we had a lot of kids for both the economic needs, but also the protection needs of that unit. We then created communities. We called those towns. Those grew into cities. Those grew into counties. Those grew into states. Those grew into countries. Those grew into continents or super countries, like right now we have in the European Union. It's done for economic, but also for military protection. All right. I think it is not unreasonable to think, and this is 100 years from now, not now. So if you're my age, don't worry about it. But I think it's feasible that we do get more and more global governance. But if it's run by a DAO and tokenization in the blockchain, well, then I could see it being perfectly democratic. Now, the governance model has to be created. We don't have that yet. But I think you could see a model in which it's perfectly executed freedom again. And that would be that's the positive of all this. That's the promise of the new economy, if you will. I think we're ways away from that governance issue, but I do think you can start to see use of the DAOs and the smart contracts and the tokenized economy here in the real world in which we live today. I think you'll see more of it. Now, again, let's look at the value of that, the value proposition here. What we're doing is shrinking the globe even more, because under this new model of the decentralized, truly decentralized economies, a person growing up in Nigeria can build a company just as rapidly as a person in St. Louis, Missouri. They have all the communication tools. They have the contractual protocols. They have the DAO structure. They have all the things they need to create the kind of an enterprise in their hometown in Nairobi, Kenya. Again, the idea of those Indians, the people from India who built the DAO to control the combine. You can see that kind of stuff evolving today everywhere. That is a new economy that offers promise and hope to everybody. That's where it's going to come from. I want to go back. If you've read my stuff about the Fed and you study where the Fed is coming from, I don't blame the Fed for the inflation that we're going to have. It's the politicians who don't have the political will to cut back spending and say no to people. Alexander de Tocqueville, who traveled this country in the 1800s, and he was a very famous writer of American history and English history. But he came and he said, when he looked at America in the mid 1800s, he said, this is the grandest experiment ever done for the human race. It was a perfectly structured republic. He commented that this will collapse only when the people find out they can write themselves a check. Well, in 1932, Franklin Roosevelt got elected, and he allowed the people to write themselves a check. It doesn't matter if you like Social Security or Medicare, and then coming through the Great Society, the Medicaid, or any of these programs. If you like the programs, that's fine. Realize that what we've done is given ourselves the ability to write ourselves checks. That's the core of the problem, because the politicians who report to us ultimately don't want to cut our benefits. Go touch Social Security, see what that does to an election. Touch Medicare. You see what it does even to Trump. And he's got a lot of political capital. Love him or hate him. You can't argue with that. He's got both houses of Congress. He's got a Supreme Court that's friendly. But if he hasn't, by the way, talked about cutting Medicare, he hasn't talked about cutting Social Security. But even the thought that he might do that is political suicide. People don't want their benefits cut back. Again, I'll tell you a true story. I used to go out and give speeches to what I'll call the right wing. It was the Tea Party people. And I would say things to them like, we need to get rid of our deficits, right? Oh yeah, we got to quit borrowing money. We got to get rid of these deficits. Fine. We need to cut foreign aid. Absolutely, get rid of it. We need to cut these benefits, cut these programs, cut this, that, and the other. Oh yeah, absolutely. We need to cut Social Security. No, don't you dare cut my Social Security. We're not going to cut ourselves budgets. It leads me to the conclusion that we can't fix the problems that we have. We're going to borrow more money. We're going to print more money. We're going to devalue our fiat currency further and further and further until this whole thing comes, crashing down. In the coincidental interim on the other side, I think you're going to see the development of this decentralized economy in which people do business with other people. They just bypass the banks, bypass all the other stuff, and they do business directly together. I think it's here. I think you'll start seeing this much, much more frequently than we do now. Now, there are things that can go wrong. And this is part of why the governance model, we have to look at what it is and we have to think about it, because everything can blow up, right? The problem here is you got to write the smart contract in a way that makes sense for the DAO. And so in many ways, he who writes the contract is going to be the one who can game the system. That can go very, very wrong. In addition to the fact it's rare, but there are bugs. And smart contracts are digital creatures, and digital creatures can have bugs or incorrect. If any of you have used ChatGPT, one of the first things it tells you is ChatGPT and all AI can make mistakes. We are still at a point where technology is fallible at that level. And so the smart contracts could, in fact, be a problem for this. It's just something to be aware of. We need to build guardrails and safety rails around all this of some sort, because unfortunately there are unscrupulous people who will take advantage of scrupulous people. We need to build those guardrails, and that's where leadership in this technology, and it is technology, leadership will come to play. We need people of good heart, good mind, and good morals to come in and set the guardrails for these DAOs so that they're established in a way that does protect the interest of the minorities. And when I say minority, I'm not talking racial. I'm talking minority within the DAO. You don't want a DAO that's 70% one person and the other 30% is 100 people. They're the minority in that DAO. We need to make sure that those rights are protected. So the structure of the smart contracts initially and the guardrails put up through the protocols, massively important. And so we're going to need leadership, and we're going to need governance ideas on how this all works. Believe me, between myself and my friends at Deny Media, who produced this. We're working on ideas for that as we speak. So let's just take a look and look at the legal frameworks that we need. This is a new area of law. I've said to you in the past many times that the problem government has is it can only look in the rearview mirror. It can't legislate forward. It doesn't know how to do that, nor should it probably. But what we're talking about today is a truly revolutionary economy, completely rethinking how everything is valued, how everything is operated, how everything works together. Well, we're going to have to be the ones who drive the legal discussions about how that is managed, again, in the rearview mirror. Because we don't want them to be disempowered by legislation, but we also want legislation to follow the truth of the individual liberty that these things provide. This is an extraordinarily complex idea, as you can imagine. But you and I are going to lead the way. And we're going to be talking on this program an awful lot about this stuff, because this technology is going to replace the Fed in my mind. And I say that because, and what generated this topic today is that podcast I did on the Fed. I think the Fed, it was installed, and we've talked about it. Let me restate some of that podcast to you. It was created because about every 10 years, the banking system failed. It finally got to the point where people said, we can't have this anymore. We need a centralized bank to smooth out the ups and downs in the economy. Well, you could argue it's done that. Now, it's done it at a cost. Our dollar's worth about 3 cents of what it was 100 years ago. Is that bad? I don't know. We all live a little better. If you look at, I saw a chart just today talking about surplus of commodities. If you look at oil or food or clothing or housing or medical care, and you dollar adjust it for its availability to people, all of those resources are much more available today than they were 30 years ago. So has all this inflation or deflation of devaluation of the dollar hurt? I don't know. I do know that it's creating a bubble. And as I've said, and you can see me on, if you go Google me, you'll see a presentation I made in what I used to call Arming America. The whole idea was to arm people with the knowledge of what was happening. But I talk about this fact that debt must be settled. And that's the risk of what the Fed's been doing. Again, it ties into why this decentralized economy is going to evolve, because that eliminates the concerns you have over this debt bubble. I have friends of mine who will tell you we should go back to the gold standard, and we should go back to an equity capital market, not a debt capital market. Okay, I could accept that. However, debt is what made the economies grow so fast. Moving back to a capital market would be a dislocation that it'd be very painful. I think what we're talking about here is the development of a new economy as we continue. It's like in energy resources. Man, I'm going all over the place. But we're talking about building over here the sustainable economy while we still use for today this unsustainable economy. It's like using oil today while we build alternative energy for the future. We're building the future economy over here while we're using the old economy of the past to keep it going. I think the decentralized capitalism of the future is going to create enormous opportunities for people to thrive. I think it's a way that we keep all these bubbles from happening, and we keep the people out of the equation to eliminate corruption. So there's much more to talk about this, and I'm end up doing hundreds of broadcasts about this, because this idea of the tokenized economy is here with us, and I think it's here to stay. But I welcome your questions. I look forward to seeing you all the time. And again, I asked in a little brief video the other day if you'd send me a note about how you feel about the economy today. I know as I do this, there's a lot of small business and independent people that are concerned just about the way it feels. It's kind of like we came through January, February, and March of 25, and we felt pretty good. All of a sudden in April, it's like the consumer index came crashing down about a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I think we're starting to feel more and more of that, but I'd like to know your thoughts on it. because I do enjoy the time we share together. And by the way, we're working right now with TikTok to go live, because I'd like to do this as a live broadcast and have a chance to talk with you directly. We'll get there. We keep pushing forward. So share the videos around, do what you can to help me get the audience, and then we'll get it live for you. But thanks again for your time. Thanks as always for watching. I hope you've learned something new today, and we'll continue to put out everything we can here on the Steve Beeman Show. Thank you much.